Hey guys, Mike Toy Bonsai Boise. So this is my twin trunk green ash tree. Today I'm going to be repotting it and doing some major cuts to that confusing mess up top. So let's get started. Okay, so here it is. So you can see there's two trunks there. And if you really look closely, there's one main trunk that's relatively straight and the other one kind of twists around it. Up top is where it gets confusing. At first glance, maybe not so much, but the more you look at it, the more confusing it gets. It's hard to tell which one is the leader, which one should be the leader. You know, if you wanted to divide into two and then two into four, it's like, where does that start? And it just sort of ended up this way. I've had this tree now from a seed about 9 years ago. And originally I had used some guy wires to hold the branches down. I just left the guy wires on too long. So that's where you get those 90-degree angles at and those bends in the branches. I'm going to use this pot here. This is a frost resistant pot. So it says. If the sticker says it, it must be true. Now back to the branches. So I'm going to mark them. I've looked at this for a while to figure out what I'm going to do. It's going to be pretty bold. I'm going to go back to basics and go with just one main branch on each tree, maybe two. But as I said earlier, the more you look at it, the more confusing it gets. So I'm going to mark them so I don't have to, I don't end up cutting the wrong one in the process. So just making my marks. And how I came to the decisions that I came to as to which ones to cut and which ones to leave was just figuring out the front of the tree first. And to figure that out, I just looked at the base. And I liked the way that it looked with both trunks side by side, not one behind the other, which I'll point out here in a few minutes. There's one. I'm going to try to root these cuttings, though I've never had success with ash trees. I'm sure it's possible for the right person who knows what they're doing on that and in the right climate and environment and everything, but for whatever reason, I've not had luck. So this tree in particular, I'll tell you as I'm making these cuts, it's not had an easy life the past few years. It suffered from two different things. One, about 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I used a certain type of insecticide that had a very negative effect on about half the trees in my collection. I've made a few videos on it. The silver maples, the green ash, and a couple others. It just wilted the leaves and sort of deformed them. And what was weird about it is that it didn't just deform the leaves, but it caused the new growth to also come out deformed for about 2 years. So even all through the entire season and then the winter and then the following spring, it happened again. It was the weirdest thing. It finally started to bounce back from that, and then I had a really bad case of aphids around the house. So a lot of the trees suffered from that. Green ashes in particular, I've noticed, are very susceptible to aphid pests. So it's not had an easy life. So you might be wondering, and you'd be right to ask this, geez, Mike, why are you making these big cuts and shoving it into a smaller pot if it's been struggling the past few years? And you're right to think it. I'd be thinking it too. In my experience, about half the time, I don't know why, but for some reason, making cuts to roots and branches sort of just kicks it into gear and sort of like resets it, or for lack of a better term. So I'm hoping that's what's going to happen here. I mean, it can't get any worse. It really just has kind of struggled the past few years. So it's a little bit of a Hail Mary approach. So that's my thinking. But if you were wondering that, you're right to wonder it. So I'm just cleaning up some cuts here. So I ended up going with 2 branches on one of the trunks, as you can see there. It they just happened to be flowing in the right way that worked. So I decided to go with that. Green ashes are, in my experience so far, they tend to be relatively hardy. They grow pretty vigorously most of the time. I haven't completely mastered the right way to prune them yet. Sometimes they take to it fine, and other times they don't like it. So also I like to prepare the pot before I dig into the roots, just so I don't have to fumble with it when the tree is all rooted and exposed. So I get the other pot ready first. So I had it in this plastic training pot the past 3 years. I think I put it in that in 2018. Lots of nice, big, healthy roots. Started to wrap around a little bit. And I could tell that it was ready for a repotting anyways, just because it was starting to come higher and higher above the lip of the pot, which means it's filling with roots and it's starting to raise. So this is the unglamorous part of the process. Very dirty, very time consuming, raking it out. So I'm going to do this in kind of fast forward, but this is something I've been doing lately. So when I've got a tree that I need to fit down to size to get into a training pot or just a bonsai pot of any kind that's smaller, I cut around the circle first, kind of like a pizza, almost like you're cutting slices of pizza, but not all the way to the middle, just around the edge. And from there, I just do a circular cut, as you'll see here in a minute, all the way around, all 360 degrees. If I need to go smaller circle from there, I just repeat the process. More little pizza slice cuts, and then cut around it again. A lot of this is kind of exploratory because I wasn't sure what I was going to find in here. It's been in this pot for about 4 years now. So there's the little pizza cuts I was talking about. Just, I cut into it maybe 3 or 4 inches, and then I go around it like this, and I cut those 3 or 4 inches off all the way around. Because there's really no sense in raking out the roots in a radial pattern yet, because it's going to be much smaller. So it'd be a waste of time. Now, once I get it to the size I need, then yes, you rake it out in a radial pattern, just like you see on some of the other videos out there. That's all good advice. I'm just saying, get it to size first, then do that. Also, my own little disclosure. I'm not saying this is the right way. I'm not saying it's the best way. I'm not saying it's the only way. I'm just saying it's my way. It's the way that I've done it, and it's worked for me. And I like to be upfront when things don't work for me, especially if I put it in a video and it doesn't work. Then I try to clear it up later. Hey, don't do that. It didn't work, kind of thing. So I'm measuring it now. Off camera, I measured the diameter of the other pot, and it was 9 inches. So I still have about 2 inches to go. This was about 11, roughly. I was kind of eyeballing it a little, but even if it's too big, I can sort of shove it in there if I need to. So one other thing I'll point out, it's just a tad bit early in the season to do this, just a little. It's right at the end of February, 2022, so it's still dormant. Not typically the time you want to go cutting roots, but I'm doing it anyways for a couple of reasons. One, I was very selective about which trees I did it on. This one, since it was kind of suffering anyways, not doing so great, what do you got to lose? Two, I have about 20 plus trees that I need to get repotted this spring that I did not do last year. So I'm just trying to get an early start. I just don't have time to do 20 or 25 or 30 trees, in that little magical couple week period in spring. So I'm trying to get a head start on it. Also, to that note, I'll say that I'm not bare rooting this. I'm cutting it down to size, but I'm keeping the root ball intact. which I've done many times and you can get away with it. I'm trying to get some of that soil out, but again, not going to bare root it. I'm just loosening it up. I think the root ball, I might have kept that root ball intact even when I potted it into that training pot back in 2018. Just judging by what some of that soil looked like around the base of the trunk. So it leads me to believe that I've always kept the root ball intact, which means it's just regular earth, in the root ball. So at some point I'm going to have to bare root it. Anyways, I got it down to size. As you can see there, I kept the root ball intact. I'm just going to move some of that soil pile around so that it accommodates the shape of the root ball. It's a little lopsided. This pot was definitely deep enough. I would have liked another couple of inches of width, but for whatever reason, when I saw it, it just stood out to me and I thought that would be a good one. So I'm going with it. I'm filling it with new bonsai soil, which is just my normal mix. If you've seen some of my other videos, it's pine bark, perlite, absorb, which is kind of similar to turfus or kitty litter. It's basically the same stuff, and small volcanic rock. I'm really being careful to work the soil into the roots as much as possible. There are some gaps in there. There was a couple spots where I would put the chopstick in and the soil would just sort of fall right out. Other spots it would be clumpy and didn't want to. So I'm just being real thorough and working that soil in, which I would always encourage everyone to do. If you don't, you end up with air pockets, and air pockets are bad things, depending on what it's like in there. It can hold moisture. It can just be air and the roots can just dry out in that spot and die. It's just, you don't want to do that. You've only got so much real estate inside this pot. You don't want to have air pockets taking it up. So I'm going in super speed here because this is the longest part of the whole process. It takes me, I think on this one, it probably took me 20 or 30 minutes of really thorough working it in. Of course, you can't see what's going on in there, so you're sort of just going by feel on the chopstick. And it just seems like you can do it forever. So here I am about 20 or 30 minutes later, giving it a good thorough watering. I used one entire water bottle here, and it still was not really running out of the bottom, so I brought it over to the sink and gave it a thorough watering after that, just to be sure that it was A, watered thoroughly after this big operation. B, you want to make sure that it is draining, because sometimes, it can just get clogged up in there during the process and not drain, and that spells immediate bad news. And lastly, I'm just going to seal up the cuts using the same stuff I always use, which is clear, non-toxic glue. Just the same stuff you would get, for back to school supplies. Nothing special. That whole bottle cost me $1. It says non-toxic. I haven't tasted it to find out. But it's worked for me. I use it on all my trees. And it both seals up the cut, doesn't hurt the tree. If you use too much of it, it ends up running down the trunk a little bit. So that's kind of the downside with cheapo glue. But you get what you pay for, and this is what I got. I would also stress again, if you use this stuff, get the clear glue. I started with the white glue. That's a bad idea. The white turns brown, gets dirty, and looks gross. So use the clear glue. But there it is. There's my twin trunk green ash tree. I'll post some updates later. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. You can watch updates on this and all the other trees that I make videos on. And thank you for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day.